We have these evenings where we have someone come and either talk about their near-death experience, or somebody who's a medium and talk about that experience, or as Terri will be doing tonight, talking about her communications with someone departed. We're delighted to have you, and if you always, if ever you want to check out our programming, you can always just check out sunrisecenter.org and see what's upcoming. And without further ado, I'm delighted to turn this over to Terri, who has attended many of our sessions, hearing other people speak, and I was delighted she contacted us and offered to present about her book and her experience with her brother. So,
thank
Terri?
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunrise Center, for being gracious and answering my emails. Thank you, all of you guys, for coming and being curious and showing up. I am grateful. I have a rather interesting story, and I'm going to try and get it all to make sense and flow for you guys, because it's all in my head and heart, and but I hope really that it comes out in a way that you're going to experience and feel somewhat of what I've been experiencing for the last almost 4 years since my brother passed. So thank you for being here. Let's start off with just a little bit about my story. I am a marriage and family therapist and an art therapist, and I have been doing the work for 17 years. And I'm originally from the East Coast. Grew up as a child in New Jersey and then Virginia outside of Washington, D.C. Spent my summers working at the Pentagon in the summer. I went to Virginia Tech for undergrad and studied clothing and textile design. My dad was very certain that I was going to be a fashion designer, and I was very certain that that was a little too scary for me, but I studied it anyways. And when it came time for me to graduate, I was supposed to go to North Carolina and work for a clothing store company, and I just sort of said, no, I can't do this. And my friend said, I'm going to Berkeley. Would you like to hop in the car and come to Berkeley for the summer? I was like, sure, Berkeley, California. So we hopped in the car, we drove across the country, we landed in Berkeley, and I think within about 3 days I decided I was not going back to the East Coast. And I have been exceedingly happy in California. Very, very much feel like it is my home now. And I've been here, 30-some years. And I've lived all over the Bay Area. I was telling the gentleman that my house was in the Oakland fire, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So after I lived in Oakland, I came to Mill Valley and then lived in San Rafael, and now I'm actually in Sonoma with my partner, who's a bass guitarist, and our cat. So, don't have kids, but I do have my cat. It's just extraordinary, I feel, what's been going on, and what I think is interesting even to me is so much of the time since my brother passed, I have my therapist brain sort of asking all the questions and checking myself, and then I have this other part of me that's absolutely not doing that at all. And even to this day, it's still like that for me. I'm still sort of balancing these two worlds. And I think I've come to understand and accept that that's really what I'm supposed to be doing, is balancing more than one world, and understanding that that's actually what we all do, whether we know it or not. But I think I'm very much aware of it now. And I'm just kind of holding it all in my consciousness at the same time. So it's been a very interesting story and journey. This story is about my brother Jeff, and his real name is Jeff, but when I was little I couldn't pronounce the J, and so I started calling him Duffy. And I proceeded to write Duffy on the walls in the house, which did not thrill my mother. But Duffy and I were about a year and 4 months apart. And we were just inseparable. We were just the best friends from the beginning. We were just the best of friends. And he was my first playmate. He was my first kind of toy. You know, I remember my mom telling me when he was born, I was just running around the house. I was just like, you know, so thrilled those early years, and I would not leave him alone. I wouldn't let him sleep. I was just constantly sort of mesmerized by this little brother. And we grew up together, and we played a lot, and we had a pretty, I would say, a pretty middle-class suburban, you know, growing up in New Jersey, Somerset, New Jersey. And we were together until my parents divorced, and I was 10 and he was 8 and a half. And when my parents divorced, we all went to live with my mom, which was very upsetting for my dad. And there was a lot of strife. And my dad eventually started calling and convincing my little brother, Duffy, to go live with him. And I think it was a really seminal moment in his life, because he went to live with my dad at a very young age, at 8. And my dad, you know, my dad was a bohemian artist. He was not a great caretaker. And so Duffy really, the way he would describe it is he really raised himself from 8 years old. And that separation from my little brother, Chris, and I, so I have another brother, Christopher, who lives in San Diego now, and he's 7 years younger. That separation was really difficult and really emotionally hard for all of us. But I don't think I realized till much later in life how hard it was for him, because my mom did everything for us. She was on it. She worked 2 jobs, she cooked everything. But my little brother was basically left to fend for himself a lot of the time with my dad. And my dad had a pretty serious drug addiction to cocaine. And so he actually passed at 49. And so even though we were raised separately and we saw each other on holidays, we remained incredibly close our whole life. And once my brothers saw that I came out to California, they were a little skeptical, but then they soon ended up in California, but they ended up in San Diego. And they just became loving surfing and all of that. Duffy was actually an Ironman athlete. He was quite athletic, as is Chris. I didn't get as much as of the athleticism, I don't think. So they stayed in San Diego and I stayed in the north. And we just remained really close our whole life. So I'm going to read you a poem that I have 3 poems in the book by 3 awesome poets, and they were gracious enough to share these with me. And I'm going to read you one by a friend that I grew up with since we were 10 years old. It's titled, Your Guardian Angel Speaks. When I was alive, I set up plastic saints on the floor. Now I peel skin and hide it from you to find. We used to be siblings, but I've become your messenger, filled with the cyanide flickers of heart. I know the seeds you've planted, your fear of dark harbors, your fast driving down fevered streets. Let me remind you that you are divine, even as you walk between the dead and the disheveled. Your carnival tales rest safely in my arms. Follow the tracks of the sky. Hear my yellow, dusty voice. Trust your bones. Your God is not a seduction. She's your spirit in silent sand and a gentle refuge of love. Leaving this world. Duffy left this world by means of suicide on July 24th, 2014. That morning I knew at just under the skin level that he was gone. The night before I had just returned to my home in California from a trip back east. I had gone reluctantly. I had been worried about Duffy ever since I went to see him for his 50th birthday a few months back. He had been very depressed, and I had decided I was going to let him know I was going to stay with him for a few weeks. I debated in my head whether or not I should go back east or go straight down to be with Duffy. Since it was a chance to see some childhood girlfriends, I had decided to go back east. I was telling myself that when I got home, I would let him know I was coming, whether he agreed to or not. And so off I went. I struggled that week wanting to enjoy the company of my friends, while in the back of my mind I was constantly worrying about my brother. I attempted to call him several times, but he would not respond. This was unlike him, and he had become a very worrisome pattern. It had become a worrisome pattern. As each day of the week went on, I was becoming inwardly more frantic. My friends tried to comfort me, but I was a mess. With each day that he did not call back, I became more determined to see him as soon as I could arrange it with work. The plane ride home felt like torture. I tried to call Duffy around 10 p.m. right after I landed. No response. When I arrived home, I realized how tired I was from the long delayed flight. I had just gotten into bed when I suddenly felt something that felt like a shove against my back. It registered just below my consciousness, and I remember thinking, that's strange. But I was so tired I went immediately to sleep. It turned out that in those early morning hours when I felt that shove is when Duffy had passed. The next morning I got up and without thinking, put on a bracelet he recently had given me. I also put on a bracelet from my grandmother Bertha and a ring from my grandmother Lucy, who were both deceased. Looking back, I now know that I was creating my own unconscious ritual. The deepest part of me knew that my brother was already gone. I went to work that morning and immediately started getting phone calls from my brother's secretary. She was worried because he had not shown up to work yet. I was afraid she would try and go to his house, and so I told her to call the police. By mid-morning, my brother's 2 legal secretaries and my younger brother Chris were outside Duffy's condominium. They were texting me and letting me know what was happening. For years, Duffy's secretaries had looked after him in numerous ways. They cared deeply about him and vice versa. They always made sure the office ran smoothly, even when my brother was feeling down and found it hard to work. They had called the sheriff and were waiting outside for the news. Then finally the worst possible news came. The sheriff let them know that Duffy's body was inside. As I sat at my desk, my brother called and delivered the news. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was trying to be strong for them, and at the same time I felt like I needed to hold it together in front of my coworkers. The next few days brought only a feeling of total despair. With my partner's help, I somehow got myself together and went down to be with my family in San Diego. I had no idea how we were going to get through this. I just kept praying and breathing. After Duffy's passing, I immediately started experiencing some extraordinary things. The first event occurred 2 days after his death. I had a dream visitation in which Duffy appeared. He was beaming and healthy and called me by my nickname T. There was a remarkable clarity to his presence. We were in a small room and I walked toward him, acknowledging how happy I was to see him. He smiled broadly as I got closer. Then he started to fade slowly from the waist down. I asked him to stay, but he kept disappearing, and then I woke up. Within days after he died, I started to have many other unusual experiences as well. There have been countless reports throughout the history of people having all sorts of synchronicities and unexplainable experiences after the passing of a loved one. Interestingly, for over 2 years leading up to Duffy's passing, I had been noticing many instances of strange synchronicities or coincidences in my life. I wonder now if life was somehow preparing me for his loss. For over 2 years before Duffy passed, I would run into the same gentleman at various times throughout the day, and we struck up a friendship, and then this would just go on and on and on for more than 2 years, that just at the most uncanny times when I needed someone to talk to or was feeling down or worried, he would pop up, and it was in the most unusual places too. and he lived on Happy Lane, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I have had many, many synchronicities since Duffy passed, and I really do feel like, from all that I've been reading, that synchronicity plays a huge part in our connection with our loved ones. And I brought today, this is my little show and tell, because I think this is one of the most remarkable synchronicities that for me makes me, really there's no answer, it just makes me have more questions. And so here's two wooden canoes. And see how similar they are?
Mm-hmm.
Almost identical, right? So one of these is mine, and I got this in Kauai. So we were talking about Hawaii. When I was in my 20s, I went to Kauai and I was swimming, and this was like dug in the sand under the water. I pulled it out and I brought it home. And I had it for decades. And I just loved it. And when we went to clean out my brother's condominium, we were all sort of searching around, and I found this. And I had never really saw this in his stuff. Like, it was really, this isn't the kind of thing he would have. And so I kind of, shoved it in my purse, like nobody else is getting this. And I brought it home, and I thought that was remarkable enough, and it made me really start to ask, what is this trying to tell me? But what was really amazing was, I'm a painter, an amateur painter, and I had painted this painting about 5 years, at least 5 years before Duffy passed. And this painting, I had pulled it out, and I was blocking a window with it, and so it was sort of sideways. And I hadn't really paid attention to it. But when I brought these home and I looked at what I had painted years before he passed, I just, it took me aback, because what is it? It's two canoes on a beach by themselves. And ever since he passed, there would be times where I went to Savannah for a vacation, and I'd go in a restaurant, and there would be like the two canoes up at their front with statues of goddesses in them, and just so many times two canoes have popped up ever since then. And so, of course, that got me thinking about, what's the message? Is he trying to tell me that we've had a past life that involved some sort of fishing or village, or what's the meaning here? And every time that those two canoes have popped up, and they'll even pop up now if I'm driving down the road, there'll be a car driving by with two canoes on the roof. And so that has become my sort of symbol for Duffy and I, for our sibling love. And I think it's the most unusual synchronicity that, because of the painting that was done before I even found the canoe. So, to me, this process has been all about questions. More questions get brought up. And I love that it's still happening. So, another synchronicity that happened was, right when I had gone to see Jeff, and he had just turned 50, and he was really depressed, and I was really worried about him. I realized he hadn't done anything for himself that was very basic for months, like get a driver's license. He had let that lapse. He had let his insurance lapse. Just the most basic things. So I was running around trying to do everything for him. And twice coming home from work, I was sitting behind a car with a bumper sticker that said, let's see if I get it right. I know, no driver's license, no registration. And it happened 2 nights in a row at the same spot, same bumper sticker. I can't remember if it was the same car. And I'm not sure what the bumper sticker is about, but for me, it was very deeply meaningful, because that is exactly what I was so worried about with him, was he was running around without a driver's license or registration or insurance. So another really interesting synchronicity was, he had a Porsche. He was a lawyer, and he had a Porsche, and it was dark blue with like a yellow interior. And I went down to Big Sur, and it was raining, and I pulled in the parking lot, and there was literally only one other car in the parking lot, and it was a blue Porsche with a yellow interior. And the license plate said Heff, H-E-F-F, and that was actually his nickname from his friends down in San Diego. They used to joke that he was like Hugh Hefner. So these kinds of things have been happening to me constantly for 4 years. And I think it's a way of making me pay attention. It started before he died. I think there was a way in which I was going, what is going on? And then ever since he passed, it still continues. So I think synchronicity is fascinating, and I think it is a connection to a level of life that we don't normally pay attention to or are tuned into until something like grief and loss happens, or if we just take notice. So synchronicities have been a huge part of my experience with this. So, read your next chapter. It is about suicide, and that's such a it's a very difficult topic, I think, for us to talk about and for us to listen to, right? The week after Duffy's passing was a well-coordinated, non-stop time of action and determination on the part of my entire family. My cousin Brian came from South Carolina and helped us do many of the things that needed to get done, such as cleaning out my brother's condominium. He was a quiet force of strength for us, and we could not have done it without him. He was our backbone, along with my brother Chris. We accomplished our tasks with numb determination and worked together without friction. Looking back, it was truly an amazing effort. Cleaning out Duffy's condominium was one of the most taxing and emotionally searing tasks we had to do. As I walked through the front door of Duffy's home, I could feel the many ways in which my brother had lived and been present there. To be in his home without him was the most difficult thing I have ever had to do. I tried to make myself breathe slowly, to imagine positive things like dolphins to help give me strength. I did not know how I would react or how my family would manage the unthinkable job we had to do now. This last home of my brother, the last chapter of his life, and a place he loved so much, was now just a storage place. To be in there without him was both surreal and tragic. What made this even harder was the knowledge that my brother took his own life. To know that Duffy had become so utterly distraught and without hope is to know the truth that no matter how much we love one another, we can never truly fathom what lies inside of another person's heart and mind. We can each carry only our own self. For some, this weight becomes too heavy. Although caring for Duffy was never too heavy for me, in the end I could not save him from his own landslide. The weight of all he faced, a divorce, loss of his family, his home, and potentially his career, was too much. It came crashing in on him, just like a giant boulder coming from above, rolling down a hill with nothing to stop it. Although we had a job to do, all I could think about was that my brother's last moments on earth were spent alone in his closet, hiding and desperate. Images of him and what he must have been going through filled my mind. To stay focused and to hold myself together was torturous. I counted to myself, prayed, walked outside to gaze at the ocean and get fresh air. The beauty of the view from his back porch was in such stark contrast to the scene within his house. For most of the time I participated with my family, all of us scurrying around the rooms, picking up things as quickly and efficiently as we could. But I avoided going back into his bedroom for almost the whole time we were there. But suddenly, toward the end of the day, I gathered my strength and I decided to go into the closet. I wasn't even sure what I would do there, I just had to go in. I walked in slowly and looked around at the closet where just a few weeks ago, Duffy and I had sat and he had talked with me. We were having one of our heart-to-heart talks, and he was asking me how one knows for sure if therapy is working. My answer was direct and simple. It's working if you feel like you're getting better. When I think back, I know I asked if he felt like it was working for him. He gave me a yes and no answer, but what I did not realize at the time was that he was really trying to tell me that none of it was working and that he was sinking. This is where I can get lost in my thoughts, going over and over again in my mind. Why did I not see? I know this is the plight of many survivors of suicide. I was part of that endless loop of wondering how he missed the signs. If I had been paying closer attention, could I have helped mend the gap that my brother had fallen into? I looked around the space, smelled his clothes, touched his things. The talcum powder for his running shoes had been recently used. The new tube of salve for his cracked heels that I had just given him laid untouched. Everything had the sense of his having just been there, living his life and using his things. I saw the rack of ties he used to wear to court. His taste was colorful and expressive. Some ties had cartoon characters. He still had some I had given him as gifts. My heart sank. I looked around at the neat row of his dress shirts and suits on the hangers. He had a lot of nice clothes, but I remembered how he had said to me not 2 months before that he needed new shirts because he didn't like anything he had. There was the row of t-shirts I had painted for him as well. One of my biggest joys was to paint characters on shirts for him. Winnie the Pooh was his favorite. It was all too clear where he sat to take his life. The footstool from the living room had been pulled into the closet and was under one of his clothes racks. I sat on the stool underneath the wooden clothes hanger. On the floor was a pile of dirty laundry. I remember doing loads of laundry for him just 2 months earlier as a way to help him get organized. He was so stressed that he could not even do his own laundry or wash his own dishes. I tried to do little things for him during my short visit. They seemed so basic, and I remember Duffy saying to me that he had never really learned how to take care of himself. Amongst the pile of clothes was the rope that he had used. The forensics team did not bother to take it but left it there. It was just a plain blue rope, one anyone could buy at the hardware store. I pictured Duffy calculating what he needed and then going and purchasing it. It seemed so sickeningly easy to me. I wondered how he felt when he bought it. Was he sad, angry, or determined? Was he bargaining with himself, perhaps intent on only using it as a last resort? We will never know. It is this not knowing that keeps the survivors of suicide in their own hell on earth if they stay lost in their thoughts of how, why, and what if. I sat down on the footstool and closed my eyes. I spontaneously put out my hands, palms up, and just breathed in. I felt a heaviness in the air around me. It was palpable and thick. I spoke to Duffy and to God. I asked him to please lift Jeff's spirit and free him from pain. I sat there for a few minutes until I could no longer take it. Then I went back and joined my family. That night was a blur, but somehow we made it back to Chris's house, exhausted emotionally and physically. We didn't talk much. We were all in our own state of shock. The next day we came back to continue the packing, and this time I knew for certain that I would sit in the same spot and bless that space again. When the time was right and everyone else was busy, I went back. Again, I sat on the footstool and took some deep breaths. This time there was a feeling of lightness and airiness. There was no heaviness left. I was relieved. I hoped it meant his spirit was freer now. I imagined I was breathing in sunlight and sending prayers of healing to Duffy. I imagined angels all around him and asked God to please hold him tight. I prayed to the universe, to God, to the angels, to let Duffy's spirit feel mine and to help him transition. I prayed that he was at last at peace and safe. I imagined my heart had a line of connection going to his heart. I was crying tears of pain and hopelessness that what I was doing was going to help, hopefulness that what I was going to do was helping him, even though I had no idea if it really could. Even in his death, I wanted to do something for my brother. So I think when I sat in that closet and spontaneously started to pray, that was the beginning of my healing and using prayer for healing. And I was raised by a pretty bohemian set of parents, neither one of them very religious. But my mom, when I was little, she did ask us to pray and had us do our prayers, I think mostly out of, this is the right thing to do. But I very spontaneously started praying in that moment. And over the last 4 years, I have come to believe that prayer is hugely important, and it's about so much more than I think we've been taught, which is to pray for what you want. I feel very much that what prayer is really signaling is our intention, and our intention is really what's important, I've come to realize. And the intention to serve somebody along with yourself is really what matters. And so prayer as well as synchronicity continue to be two threads in my story for the last 2 years that I find a realness in and a connection to this afterlife and to those who have passed. I think it's not easy. Different religions have different beliefs about suicide. My understanding is from my brother and my automatic writings with him is that the concept of being punished when you get on the other side doesn't really exist the way that we think of it. And it doesn't specifically exist for suicide survivors. And it's more, in fact, what I've gained an understanding of, it's more like someone who has been at that depth of pain is actually escorted in a way after they cross over for their own healing, not punished or judged, as I think a lot of people are taught. And I know it's very controversial, and sometimes I realized when I was going to talk about this book that to speak about suicide might be controversial for people, and I honor people's different beliefs around it. It is a very tender topic, and I just wish to share my little piece of what I've learned and what I believe now, which is, in fact, many bright, courageous, determined people take their lives. Because they are in a great deal of pain in this life, and they just don't see a way out. And my brother was extremely brilliant, but he could not find a way out, and that seemed to be the way out. So that was his choice, and unfortunately, his determination, he applied it in that way at that moment. I'll read you another poem. This is by Bob O'Hearn. You opened your hand and I flew out. I fly through the sky with your wound in my heart. You're the open wound in every heart, and you, it's perfect mending. My first energy experiences. On a September night, some 2 months after Duffy passed, I had my first mysterious energy experience. I came home one night after work, heartsick and tired. I laid down on my bed. I had my arms out and my palms up. I was crying and wondering, how do I go on? How do I accept this? Spontaneously, I asked my brother if he would like to visit me. I said, Duffy, I love you and I miss you so much. I wish and I'm sorry I could not save you. Can you forgive me, and would you please visit with me? Immediately, within seconds, a sensation of rolling energy came into my right palm. I felt waves of energy pulsing, circling, and stroking my palm and forearm. "It's you, Duffy, I can feel you," I said silently to myself. I asked if it was really him. I asked for him to squeeze my hand. I felt sparks on my fingertips and a pressure all around my forearm. It was a gentle, playful, but strong energy. The thought came to me, I am not gone, I am existing on a different level. I will always be in your heart, loving you and connected to you, sister. Now, I'm a rational woman, a professional. I'm also pretty open-minded. Still, this was a stretch for my level of openness and curiosity. I briefly thought to myself, am I having a hallucination or some form of grief reaction? What is happening here? After this experience, I often wondered to myself, what would others think? Rationally, I knew that this could be the result of my mind not being able to accept the magnitude of the loss. But in my heart, I felt that what was happening was real, a genuine connection to my brother and not a mere mechanism of my own mind. So yes, in the beginning I struggled a bit. After all, there was a rational side of my mind and there was an intuitive side. One part of me felt I had a duty to be rational, but because I had been trained as a professional psychotherapist, the voice in my head telling me to be rational was not nearly as loud or strong as the heartfelt sense that I had something very special that was happening and beyond my usual set of concepts and expectations. And although it could not be perceived by others, I was certain that what I was feeling was genuine and real. Amazingly, I have felt the presence of what I call Duffy's energy every day since that first time in September of 2014. For a long time, every day I did this and asked for him to visit, sometimes more than once a day. The sensations had variety and depth. Most of the time I felt a rounded, pulsing energy. Sometimes it would go up and down my arm, transferred over my other hand. Sometimes I felt like I could juggle the energy, almost like an invisible slinky. It always felt reassuring and there was a gentleness to it. After the first few months, I would also begin to experience a type of paralysis when I would hold my forearm up as I lay in bed. This paralysis started to be followed by what I now would call out-of-body experiences. At the time, I wasn't sure exactly what that was, but I had about 10 of them in the last 4 years, and I haven't had one for quite some time. It was happening more often when he first passed. But my hand would feel, I couldn't move it, it was paralyzed. And then typically I would feel like I knew I was lying in bed. I was very conscious I was lying in bed. But then I was very aware of, me just suddenly became just this idea of me in this rubbery body. And then it felt like for lack of a better word, my spirit started going up towards the ceiling in different, almost like snowflakes going up. And so I would have the experience of part of me going up like that and part of me still in the bed. And it wasn't scary. It was very interesting. It wouldn't last longer than maybe 10 minutes at the most. And then those particles of me would come back and down into my body. One time they kind of seemed like they came back down into my head and into my spine through that route. On occasion when that would happen, I would have these very vivid memories. One time I remembered my girlhood bedroom. Every little detail of the bedroom came into my mind. I can remember my doll collection, what the dresses looked like. It was just amazing what my memory was doing with some of those. What I now believe were out-of-body experiences. And it hasn't happened for quite some time, but there was about 10 of them, I would say. And they all had that quality, and I was absolutely awake, conscious, feeling both things at the same time going on. And so synchronicities, out-of-body experiences, I had some premonitions. One night I woke up out of like just dead sleep, woke up, and I just had this thought in my mind, blood pressure medication. And I was thinking, okay, maybe Duffy's trying to tell me my partner needs to check his medicine or something, but I was sort of like, how am I gonna explain this to my partner, because he's not really on board with all of this. And I woke up the next morning, and my little brother called me, and he said, sis, I don't want you to freak out, but last night Mom had a reaction to her blood pressure medication. And I'm like, what time? And he's like, 3:30. I'm like, oh. I said, I know, and I'm gonna tell you how I know. I said, the thought just came in my mind, and it didn't feel like my thought. It felt like I was being told. So, and that's not something I typically would have done before he passed. That isn't something I would have had happen to me. Another time, same thing, I got this image and the words came into my head about a street sign pointing like, go straight. And, I was just sort of like, okay, and I realized the next morning I'd gotten a text from one of my brother's really good friends, and he had accidentally sent me the text, but he was sending a text to his friends basically saying, I'm lost, like, can you give me the directions? And it was also at the same time. And so that little window of having that ability opened up for me, which was also fascinating. And I have to say, with all of these things, I have not been scared at all. I've actually been quite excited and happy about it, and I welcome it. I haven't had so many of those anymore, but that was definitely going on too. So I think these are all little ways of communication. In my journey, I did a lot of reading, and I did a lot of, I went to the Association of Spirituality and Consciousness Studies. I went to their conference, and I just wanted to talk to other people who might be having these kinds of experiences. And I met some really amazing ladies there, and I was in a room at one point, and the presenter, there was over 100 people in that room, and the presenter said, could everyone who's lost a child under 25, I think he said, stand up. And all these people stood up. And, to see a room full of moms stand up who had lost their kids, it was really hard. And I started sharing some of what had already been happening with me with some of these moms and hearing some of their stories. And part of the reason I wrote this book is because what I was hearing from some of these people was, one woman said to me, I'm in my kitchen and I can feel my daughter's hands on my shoulders, but I can't really talk about it. She's like, you don't talk about this in Kansas. And I have a bit of the protecting the underdog in me, and so when I heard that, I was sort of like, that's not right. And I knew how much I was struggling with what was going on, even though I'm a professional, really grounded person. You ask anyone who knows me, that's what they're going to say. She's very grounded. No, but something very strange was happening. Many strange things were happening to me. And I was still questioning it, but I still knew on some level it was very real and very meaningful. And I also knew that I had the ability to write about this and had the freedom to do it, that I guess now I realize some other people don't have. So that's what made me want to write this book, is I met a lot of people who said, this happens, but I've only told my husband, or I've only told my wife. I've only told one other person. And since I've been going to Copperfields and some other places, I can tell you that most people who come up to me have their own story. Mm-hmm. And they're pretty powerful stories. So this happens to millions of people, these unusual experiences. But we're still not so open about talking about it or acknowledging it. So that is why I wrote it and want to share it. So part of what happened to me is I got a free medium reading, and I had never had a medium reading before. And this gentleman read something I had written for that journal, for that association, and he offered to give me a free reading. And his name was Paul Biskup, and he has passed, and he was a lovely gentleman. And he gave me a reading over the phone, so I'm going to read to you a little bit about what happened in that reading. May 25th of 15. So this was a birthday, a year after he passed. This was a birthday reading for him. I had a reading with a medium on Duffy's birthday yesterday. I felt it was the most appropriate way to honor him. A lovely gentleman had contacted me after reading my article in the Academy Journal. He said he was touched by my story and wanted to offer me a reading for free. He has been doing this for over 50 years. I gratefully accepted. Wow. I had never done this before. We agreed to have him call me at 1 o'clock. I called the appointed time and we spoke very briefly before he began. I learned that he has a degree in cultural anthropology and practices art therapy like I do. He explained the parameters and what to expect. He explained to me that a reading is totally unique to the person for whom it is for, and that nothing is guaranteed but to keep my mind open. He also explained that the spirits decide who wants to come through, and that sometimes it can be quite surprising who does come through. I was ready. At first, a young man stepped forward. He was in his early 40s and some type of artist who had recently passed. I did not immediately recognize who this could be. Then more people came in, my Uncle Herbie, my father, and my stepfather. To my surprise, my partner Tom's parents also came in. The medium explained that this was not uncommon. My mother's second husband came in. The medium said he had died of an aneurysm, and indeed he had. At first we thought it was my dad, but it became very clear it was my stepfather. He wanted my mother to know that he still loves her and knows she regrets the way she left him. It was a difficult decision for my mom. She loved him very much, but he had some issues that made it impossible for her to stay with him. I have to admit, though, that by this time I was wondering, where is my brother? Eventually, Duffy came in after a half an hour. He said he was with my dad and my uncle. My dad referenced calling me by a nickname I had as a child, but he had stopped using it as I got older. I hadn't heard it for a while. Duffy too referenced me by his nickname from E.T. that he had adopted from our mutual friend. They referred to my clown side. This was exciting to me, as I have in my life more than once dressed as a clown for children's events. They also referenced a period in my life, the fishing around time, where I was very uncertain about my life. This was very true. From the age of 24 to 34, I was fishing around for what to do or who to be. My dad, my uncle, and Duffy all said that I had landed a big fish in terms of finding my career and my path. I also heard from the medium that a brand new door was about to open for me. I was advised to take one step at a time, and they would be with me 100%. I have heard of spirit helpers, but never personally felt I had one or knew how to connect with them if I did. It seems a male spirit helper came through in the reading. He spoke of a blue period in my life. He said there were still echoes of this for me, but that I was going to come into a joy that I had never thought possible, that would erase those echoes. It would be a spiritual door opening inside, with changes as well on the outside. Then Duffy spoke. He leaned into the medium and said, "Thank you for doing this," which is exactly what he would have done. That was the kind of person he was. He was personable and thoughtful. He said he's still very close to me, and that our relationship goes back a very long time, perhaps many lifetimes, and it's a deeply established spiritual relationship. He was sorry that things were cut short, and he feels he came here to do what he needed to do, and his life had such a richness. He is now astonished reviewing it about how much he did and accomplished. He got so much done in such a short time. He said he'll be with me always, and he wanted me to know that he went quickly to the other side. He was greeted by our grandpa. I want to believe he did go quickly, as his death was particularly gruesome to imagine and has kept me wondering many times about how much pain and suffering he may have experienced. He wanted me to know he was happy and I did not need to grieve unnecessarily for him. He said he will be walking through the door with me What door is that, I'm wondering? So it was, to me, a gift that I was given that reading. And he said some specific things that, he's a gentleman I had never met, I had never even talked to or emailed once. And so he said very specific things that there's just no way he could have known them. And so that was sort of thrilling for me to go through that. And a little bit further confirmation of this feeling for me that Duffy was, he wasn't suffering on the other side, or he wasn't being judged again for taking his life. Around the time of this, when I went to the Academy of Spirituality and Consciousness Studies, I met a woman there, and we became friends, and she had lost her son. And she's a woman who does electronic voice phenomena. And so we became friends, and we decided we were gonna communicate with each other. And we left the conference, and we went about our own way. And a few months later, we found ourselves at another conference, and we shared a hotel room, decided to share a hotel room. And we spontaneously decided we were gonna do some EVP together. And so she had her laptop, and does everyone know what EVP is? I'm sorry, right? So let me bring you back in. So EVP is where someone may use typically a tape recorder, or in her case, she uses a recording on, it's called Wave Pro. And you're not on the internet when you do it, it's on the laptop. And it's recording the sounds in the room. So typically people throughout history have used different kinds of recorders to do this. And what you're searching for is discarnate voices capturing it on the recording. And so, and typically you use a background noise to help facilitate the capturing of the voice. And so we were in a hotel room together, and we just spontaneously decided that we were gonna try this. And we got out the laptop and got everything set up. And so I wouldn't just call him Duffy, I would call him Fluffy, Fluff and Stuff. I had all number of variations that I would tease him with. And so in the beginning, I just said, hey Fluffy, I'm here, we're here. I didn't know what to say, because I felt a little silly, like, all right, I don't know what this is. So we just tried it. And she went back, and she listened, and she sent me some of the clips. And one of the first clips, you hear a male voice say, "Thank you for calling Fluffy." And so again, and we've done it a number of times now, and we get really good clips. And so, of course, for me, that brings up a million questions. Really, how is this happening? And so EVP is another way and I feel like it was a blessing to meet her, and she's a lady of enormous integrity, and she's just been really helpful for me in my journey, and just further giving me more confirmation. I believe that Duffy is just right here in a different vibration, and doing everything he can to give me that information that is true. So EVP is another way that over the last 4 years that I've been getting contact with him. And last but not least, I want to talk about automatic writing. And so, let's see if I can find it. So on March 31st of 15, I write, "I decided to try my hand at automatic writing last night. I put myself in a relaxed state and guided myself through a journey to connect with Duffy, and then to automatically write his answers to my questions. Of course, I wanted to know how he was. Here is his reply. I am free to do what I can. You are also free to see me, hear me, touch me. We are together always. There is no separation, only space of another nature. Not a wall, but a thin membrane that can't be crossed over now. I am fine. I feel good, healthy, strong, and light at the same time. I have friends, and they are my spirit family. They help me know what to try next. It's all about trying new things and going forward into the unknown with a known felt purpose. We are supposed to make whole the parts of ourselves that need work. It's all for the best. I love you so much, sister. And so I got excited, and I decided that I was going to have a session with Ralph Metzner. So does everyone know who Ralph Metzner is? So Ralph Metzner has done the LSD studies with Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, and he actually is here in Marin. And so I knew that he did this particular type of therapy, a regression type therapy. And I also secretly wanted to share some chapters of my book, because I thought, I just want to hear someone who's that open to unusual things. I want to hear what he has to say. Because part of me was still sort of like needing confirmation, like doubting myself. And so I scheduled a session with Ralph Metzner. And I went over there one very hot day. And it was funny because I was told that the door, like there was a waiting room door, but in fact it was just the door to his office. So I just kind of burst in the door, like, and he's sitting at his desk and he looks up all startled, like, who is this woman? So I'm like, hi. And so I brought some chapters of my book that I had started. And it was funny and humbling because I thought he was going to be very nice. And he was in fact pretty grumpy and kind of mean. And I was I want everyone to be nice, and so I was sort of taken aback by this. But what he said to me was enormously important and helpful. He read some of what I did, and he said, you know what, you're worrying way too much about what people think. He's like, quit spending your time worrying about what people think, and just focus on what you know to be true, and keep going with that. And he said, your brother's obviously trying to get your attention. So he's like, so keep going, keep asking, keep dialoguing with him, like don't waste that. And so I felt like I got a little bit, kicked in the butt by Ralph Metzner, and I laughed, and I thought about that, and so that actually spurred me on to do more automatic writing with Duffy. And automatic writing, it's one of those things that, if you look it up in Wikipedia, they're going to say, well, it's probably your subconscious, and there's no real proof of any of this, but there's no real proof that you are actually in connection with spirit. It's mostly thought to be that your unconscious is producing this. I now believe otherwise. And I think when we say it's just your imagination, I think we have no idea what we're saying when we say that, because our imagination is hugely more powerful and important than we really realize. And it's very much a connector to other realms and other levels, I think. Because if you think about the miracle of imagining something and then we figure out a way to bring it into form, that's pretty miraculous. So I started to do more automatic writing and just asking him various things. And I'm going to read you one or two of the questions that actually are at the back of the book that I asked. And Jeff and I had kind of an amateur love of physics and science, and we'd always talk about the big questions together. So I decided to ask some science and physics questions. And actually, Bruce Scott Hill, who wrote The Paranormal is Normal, he got a hold of those questions and he said, you should put these in your book. So I did at his suggestion, and I'm going to read some of them. Question number 1, what form do you take now? Terri, I'm in all forms. Electricity, molecules, cellular, sun, wind, sky, get it? No? Well, let me see if I can explain. My brother was a little snarky. He was a lawyer. Let me see if I can explain. I exist, yes, I do, but not how you think of me. No more Duffy curls, smile, sense of humor. Those things are not me now. Me is everywhere all at once. Yes, I am still me and always will be. You too will always be you. However, we lose our one self and become part of the many selves. I'm a part and I'm a whole. Not diminished at all. I am grander in a way, really, that is hard to explain. Question number 2, I asked, can you hear my thoughts? He says, I can hear your thoughts because the connection of everything in the universe is thought. Actually, I'm closer than a thought. I feel your intent to think of me. I already know it. We know intent and thoughts, they just are. I said, do you have friends? Well, we have groups rather than friends, groups of like or equal-minded souls. We have a purpose together to create, grow, learn, and expand. I'm part of more than one group. They blend together to make me whole, always in a synergistic way, unique to me and my needs for growth. Do you ever get bored? No, no boredom here, only constant potential. I asked, does prayer matter? Does it change anything? He says prayer does matter. It shows intent, and intent matters and is what changes things. It changes the direction of energy. Any advice for me, I ask. Please don't try and be there for so many who may not believe what you are sharing. Just try and find a way to be out on the edges of life and believe inside of yourself. Do the projects, but be you. Get it? Be careful you don't waste precious time on false idols. They will suck you dry. Instead, plan carefully where and who you and why you engage. Your spirit is sparkly and delicate and special. Don't waste it. What you do is different from who you are. Don't forget that. What you do should serve who you are. Much of the illusion of life on earth is of the importance of activities, but they are not real in a sense. What is real is the spirit energy and life propelled on with the fuel of soul intent. Be intent on wise action. Everything reflects the true intention of our souls. Did you realize do we realize we have died right away? No, you don't realize it right away. You feel the same as on earth, but you slowly start to notice that things are not life as you knew it. It's a little strange at first, but there are people there to love and reassure you. You're happy to see them, and then you sort of forget where you just came from. You keep acclimating to the new life. As you do, you realize you like it, and so there is no fear. And I will read one of the science questions that I asked. Is information a fundamental factor in nature? Yes, information is carried throughout the universe by waves of harmonized energy. Information does not guarantee an outcome, though. It just is. It exists in various forms for the viewer. The consciousness or eyes look for what is needed and see the information that can be accommodated into the viewing consciousness seamlessly. As the viewer seeks answers to grow in consciousness, so the information most fitting is seen or chosen. The viewer assimilates the information in a way that keeps equilibrium. Information feeds growth. All kinds of growth happens simultaneously all over the universe in this way. I asked him a question a couple nights ago, 2 nights ago. I said, does God want me to be happy? And I got, God does not want. God just ceaselessly gives opportunity to you. He, in quotes, doesn't take away. It's a matter of being conscious of your own desire that sheds light on the gifts available. As you seek, so you shall find. True. Are the answers usually near at hand, I ask. Yes, absolutely. That is the whole purpose of this game of life. It's not about bigger, better, further away. It's about recognition, reinvention, release, and release, actually. And I want to end with the third poem by another friend of mine, who's an extraordinary poet. And this is titled World. Folded like origami inside the tiny white planet of hard moonflower seed, unseen multitudes of vine, stem, and tightly packed blossom, heavy with contained scent and anticipation, knowing already to wait for dusk, for the secret lunar signal. The summer night's new bud shivers its first infinitesimal release, enough only to taste the earth's gasp of cool relief, rising damp off the lawn. A drop of twilight slips into the pursed mouth. Membranes hum and the vibration of peepers are singing in the trees. Night lures and teases till the single pod, overcome, surrenders like a lover. Luminous petals, thick and fresh as clean linen, unwind themselves to stretch, spread wide in thrall to the mirror of the moon's high face. I hold it all in my palm. So my journey continues. I have learned, one of the messages I clearly got is there's always new horizons, and it's never ending. And I feel like that's exactly how I see life now and what is unfolding with this process. I never, if you had asked me who's the one person in life you don't want to lose, I would have said Duffy. And I lost the one person I didn't want to lose. But I do believe now that I was meant to understand something about life, and the only way I was going to get it was this way. Mm-hmm. And that somehow I was able to get it and hold it and handle it. And I do feel like I was meant to share it, that I do want to share it. Because I think not enough people feel free to share their own stories. And I want to help people feel a little bit braver about doing that. So thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you.
So would folks like to take a little break and then ask questions, or go straight into questions? What do you think?
Sounds good.
Okay, let's take like a 2-minute stretch break, and then we can have some questions and sharing.
What's your name?
What's that? Yeah, I didn't hear from her.
So
I heard from her on Wednesday.
She ran off back to back.
I knew she had to go back, but she was gonna drop Richard back
Did
off.
you have a personal
in
interest in
Vegas.
the
Did
subject?
she go back last night?
No.
She did go back today.
We're doing negotiations, just taking a break and then question and
But I figured I'd after she's supposed to be back at work on Monday, so I figured
That's a good
I'll talk to her after.
Yeah, she's gonna come down there tonight.
Oh,
See you in a while. They stayed on the boat. So
She loved that.
yeah.
Are you on our email?
Yeah.
Discovered.
A little bit about her daughter.
Rosemary, right?
No, for sure. Stalking me?
Did you meet Terri?
No.
No.
She works for him, boyfriend.
Why do you ask?
Yeah. She's a therapist.
They give you a little table, some water. The last Copperfields let me choose a book from the store. Like they're really incredible. And when I talked to the woman, she said, well, you know, we have authors who have been doing this for a while, and they'll run in here late, they'll sign a few books, and they leave. They don't even stay the whole time. So she's like, thank you for staying. So I just want to say Copperfields has been amazing. But I do, my interest is really, I want my book to reach people that it's going to really have a difference in their lives and give them hope. And I think that's just the one word that I want to read something. One of the automatic writings I did with Duffy was I asked him about anything he wanted to share. And so he spoke about some virtues that he felt he had lived by, and I wanna read 2 of them. Okay. So my brother was a very kind, gentle, but steely determination. His job was he was a workman's comp lawyer who, when people would get hurt on the job and their job wouldn't wanna pay for their care, he would go up against those companies. And so he was really kind of a fighter for the underdog. So he was just this amazing combination of gentle and very determined. Kindness. If I had to choose the most important virtue, it would be kindness. Without it, life is hollow. So often we forget to be kind. Unknowingly, we hurt others' feelings in the blink of an eye. What cannot be undone is the harm we do to our relationships. I did not realize until it was too late that my moments of anger left a mark on some of my relationships. So many times I came out of the vicious cycle of depression and hypomania to find the aftermath of the tornado I created. My brother had bipolar disorder, I didn't mention that. I wish I had been able to see what was happening while I was in it, but the reality of having a mental illness is that often you cannot see what is happening until afterward, if ever. I know I was often kind, maybe too kind, to some who would take advantage, but I would not change that. From here, it is clear that our number one job on earth is to be kind, to always extend a hand and to not withhold love. Most importantly, be kind to yourself. Be gentle with your own failings. Don't judge yourself, rather keep acknowledging how far you've come. There is no failure in earthly life, it is false. Focus on extending joy and kindness as you go along your journey. Hope. I lived my life like a bird flying towards some great horizon. I was alive with energy to spare. I flew forward daringly and recklessly. I spoke about hope to my friends, but there were times in my life that I was hard-pressed to find it for myself. Hope is our birthright. It makes us alive with energy. It gives us peace and soothes us when all else fails. Hope is the fuel of God. We are not just atoms, flesh and bone. We are the movement of divine light. What matters in being human is to be there for each other, to hope and to care. I put up walls between myself and those who tried to offer me hope, and behind those walls I died. Here I am free, together with others who are just one world away from yours. We want to share, we want to give hope, we live, we are loved, you are loved. Reach out your hands and take hold of it. So the whole idea about serving others and not judging yourself is also a big part of what's come through to me in the last few years. And also as a therapist, I've seen the ways in which people's judging themselves has done tremendous harm.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that it's sort of needless to judge here, and we aren't judged when we cross over, in fact. There's a balance, and there's a writing of the balance, but it's not how we think about it. It's not condemnation. So I invite anyone to ask me a question, or if anyone has their own story of having received a sign or wondering if you've received a sign, I would love to hear that. So, yeah.
41 years ago, my mother passed when I was in college, and back then, at that very intense time in my life, you know, because she was pretty much my primary family, and I had an experience the night that she passed of my girlfriend at the time, and I witnessed her appearing in the room as flashing, flickering white light, and the dog woke us up, who was first experiencing it, and there was a period of time when it was so emotionally intense. It was almost like that sensitivity to other realms like that was open for me in dreams and all, and it's so long ago, and suddenly coming, stopping in and hearing you talk about it kind of prompted me to reflect, looking back all these years. Where is her spirit, her energy now? And because I haven't really literally been reaching out to communicate in any manner.
Mhm.
And so I'm just, part of me says, I have sort of the kind of Buddhist perspective, now more of a little, perhaps Christian, the idea of an afterlife. I'm not sure. I just don't know what to make of it, of the mind I have these days, and yet I'm open. And because I haven't put attention thinking about these things, it's like, it's not in my realm, and yet I appreciate hearing your story, and I'm curious again, what if? Where do people all reincarnate in a certain manner? I mean, again, I haven't, from your experience with him, I don't know, is there any more you could say about that, where people cross over, how much of it is, if you don't have necessarily a belief system about that, how do you hold this?
Well,
How do you make sense of this?
he wasn't a religious person either. We weren't raised that way. I did ask the question, what happened when he first crossed over? And he said it was like a hot shower, like taking a hot shower. Like just almost that sensation of water coming on you and enveloping you in warmth. And that our grandfather Leon was there to greet him. And Leon was a pretty strong character. He was an inventor, and so there wasn't any fear, and there's sort of this natural passing that felt like a shower in his description. I have not asked the specific questions. We were talking about this, about what about reincarnation, and these are great questions. And have we reincarnated before? What does this mean? To me, this means yes, we live together, maybe in Polynesia or something. That's what I take of it, is we absolutely had a past life together. It's interesting because sometimes when you start thinking about this stuff, more stuff comes up and you really remember. And I remembered when I was really young, this woman, she was sort of a self-proclaimed psychic and seer, and she had told me that I actually died. I was a boy in a former life, and my father was a fisherman, and I actually fell out of the boat and drowned. I was 8 or 9 years old. And so I sort of remembered that after a long time. I hadn't even thought about that when all this came up. I think whether or not reincarnation happens, from what I'm understanding, there's more that idea of if there is reincarnation, it's all happening at the same time. It's not a linear thing the way we think about it here on Earth. There's a lot of questions I can be asking. I had a similar light experience. One night I felt bouncing on the bottom of my bed, and it woke me up, like someone was trying to get my attention, bouncing on the back end of my bed. And when I woke up in the corner of my room, I saw flickering like rainbow and white lights, and they just flickered for like 8 seconds maybe and stopped, and I've never seen that again. I think it's pretty rare to actually see somebody. People have had visual signs, but it's pretty rare. But the lights aren't as rare, actually.
Yeah, it was almost like in the periphery, but it was a kinesthetic felt sense too. The fact that the dog was yipping and making noises that preceded our noticing, and I almost had the hair on my back of my neck. It was like both scary because it was like foreign of a thing. I hadn't had that kind of experience, but again, I don't know. I would like to, reflect and make contact again, to be honest with you, as we get older and think about family and our heritage and our connections with, our ancestors and all that.
I think it helps to, if you don't meditate, it helps to get in that very quiet state. Absolutely, that's really important. It helps to kind of get your heart. My friend says the thing about the 3 Ps. You ask for permission to connect. You say a prayer that it's going to be protected space. And that it's just going to be, I always pray that it's going to be healthy communication that's going to be healing for both of us. The other thing I've come to believe is I don't think this is all just like he's he's showing or giving me something. I think there's a way in which, I think the way I say it in the book is we're healing or we're moving each other forward by what's happening. I don't believe anything is one way anymore. It just, it just doesn't sit with how things go. Everything is a balance. And so I believe that everything that happens is simultaneously helping him in his world and me in mine. I do believe that now. Any other?
Does your brother Chris have any?
Yeah, so my little brother, so sometimes I think things can run in families. My little brother's very conservative, he's very different than I am. But from a young age, he would have things happen that he would be really scared by, and he wouldn't know what to do about it. And so he would tell us, like, I woke up last night and I saw a little girl in the doorway of my bedroom.
Mhm.
And so he had all kinds of things his whole life that he really didn't want to have happen to him. So he absolutely, he hasn't had as much, but he's had a few instances of signs from Duffy, for sure. Not to the extent of this, but he also, when Duffy died, he became a father. And so he literally started raising my nephew right after Jeff passed. And so he's been so consumed by that, I think he hasn't had the doorway to really focus on it like I have. And he was distraught in a different way.
The interesting thing would be whether your nephew was noticing anything.
So he
communicate
and
back
his,
to Chris.
he and his wife had said that many times our nephew, Brian, he would look down the hallway, or he'd look up in the corner of the room and just be laughing and smiling, like he was totally interacting with somebody. And they very much believed it was
Yeah.
Duffy.
Because the kids don't know any difference in the dimensions.
Yeah, he
It's all one
absolutely did that,
dimension.
and so that was cool too, and that was cool for my brother to witness, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So, any good restaurants there, or?
Yeah.
No, the point is
Yeah.
that.
Angel food.
Well,
What's a tipping standard? No, I mean, yeah, I ask that because I my mother was talking about experiences, an out-of-body experience, and she noted that, like, the lack of tactility. So, not being able to touch and feel texture, or to breathe, be able to, I'm extrapolating, but to breathe in, or to
Yes.
So I would guess that those of us that want that or derive that probably do come back.
Yes.
We're more inclined than others that don't have that kind of desire.
well, you hear that Earth is the school of hard knocks, right? I've read a lot of other people's accounts that, this is where this soul comes to learn in a hard way, because it's not easy here, right? To me,
So they're
I think
tough cases.
it's very tough, and to me, there's so much amazing beauty. There's so much amazing beauty and amazing things about this planet that, I don't see it that way. But my brother, he had bipolar disorder, he had an addiction, and at the very end, he was in a divorce. So, that was real pain, real pain.
Did you, on the other part of the question about like a tipping center, I mean, do they have, I mean, in our life and world, everything's transactional, it's extremely transactional. And is there any sort of like, you're obliged to put out effort or give something to get something in return?
No, I don't get any of that. It's all about intent to grow. And this idea of, when you look in a kaleidoscope and you do the click and the pattern changes, and then you do the little click and it changes again, I get the idea that it's like that everything is really about creating wholeness and growth in a way that the soul is just clicking into its next way that is becoming even more whole. And it's not a judgment, it's not a good or bad from their point of view. Interestingly, when I was driving over here thinking about this, I saw an egret and it had a big mouse, some kind of mouse or something in its mouth. And when we look at nature and we look at that, we're like, yeah, right, that's what it is. But I think that's all what is happening. But when something bad happens here, we are just so taught to be fearful, and we're so afraid of death that we can't see, I think, that there's a much larger pattern that is absolutely happening all the time. and we are part of that pattern. And I think we will continue to be part of a pattern forever in different forms. That's the message I'm getting.
And you mentioned your brother had bipolar and that, one of the messages he had wished he had been kinder, I assume he saw the hurt that he had inflicted.
Yeah.
So this question is sort of about doership. He came in this realm with bipolar disease, which seems to be somewhat out of control for people's actions.
Yes.
So he chose that, but at the same time, it sounds like he wished he was kinder, but was, my question is like, well, that doesn't always go together if you're mentally impaired or whatever you wanna call it. So why the regret, or why thinking he could be anything other than this?
Right.
And then
Right.
it ignites all sorts of questions. Well, are we the doer? Maybe it's like you said, it's just a mouse being eaten by a bird. Maybe your brother was just doing what a bipolar person does, and then there's this feeling he has of regret. I'm not sure how that works.
Well, I think there are a lot of times, the thing about him building hiding behind walls, he was a chameleon. He was an expert at being what everyone else wanted him to be. To the extent that I think he really, if he ever had a center of self, he completely lost it. And the bipolar disorder didn't help. That's a really very intense condition to have, right? And so, I think he could not be kind to himself. He didn't know how to take care of himself or be kind to himself. And many times when he could have reached out to others, he didn't. He built the wall bigger.
So I guess my question is, if you come in with something like bipolar, how could you have done it any other way?
When he's asking, I wish I had, I don't know, that's a good question. Because when you have a mental health condition like bipolar disorder, you're not always in the throes of it. So you will have depressive states in bipolar, and you will have manic states, but there are times when you'll just feel fairly even keel. You're not always in the throes of that. It's rarely with any mental health issue are you completely in the throes of that.
But I think what his response was, he wasn't regretting it. He was just saying, I could have done it this way. So I don't hear regret in it. He's just he can look at it a way, like it's like a different perspective for him to see like what his actions were, and so he's just stating it. So he's just saying, I could have been kinder.
Mm-hmm.
I could have done this, this way, but he's not saying, I regret doing it. He's just saying, as I'm looking at my life as it was on Earth, it's just, that's what I'm seeing, and so he's just stating a fact. I don't know that he's regretting it. He's just saying, this is what I see, and this is what I could have done.
It's an interesting response, because it's saying that we have choice, and that's a big question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think when you're in human form, I think you do have a choice. Like, we make choices every day, but when we're in spiritual form, it's like we can see what those choices could have been, and so we can say, I could have done it differently. But
and the response I've asked sort of questions along this line about free will, and the response I got was, see if I can say it in a way that's going to make sense. The soul chose this life to learn certain lessons, and but we, every minute of our life, we have free will. I can hold this book, I can sit down, I can get a drink of water, and my soul, whatever lesson I came to learn, I'm going to get that lesson no matter what choice I make, but I'm just going to get it in a different way. The picture's going to look a little different, but I'm still going to get the lesson. That's the way I understand it now. So there is free will, but you definitely came for a reason, came for a lesson, and you're going to get it, just how you choose to get it. And that whole idea of someone who takes their life, I mean, there is the idea that taking one's own life was a viable choice, a perfectly reasonable choice. I know that's maybe hard for some people to hear, but.
Sometimes it might have been the only choice.
Yeah, and, you know, I would say I think that's probably true. I wouldn't discount that, yeah.
Yeah, I lost my son, his name was Chris, 8 years ago, and he was an attorney also. And I've had extraordinary experiences, so I really appreciate hearing it. It kind of lines up with the kinds of experiences that I've had.
Do you wanna share one?
Well, I mean, so he was an attorney, but he also was a very accomplished musician, and so music is, you know, the primary way that I, you know, there are certain songs that come on, absolutely unbelievable, the
Yeah.
timing of the songs.
Yeah.
That is, you know.
Very common, right?
Mind-blowing. And it's kind of interesting, more recently, I mean, stretches of time will go by and the songs don't come on, and I feel so lost, you know, because I don't feel connected to them. And then all of a sudden, at these meaningful times, sometimes it's when something, you know, is gonna happen in my life, they're just there constantly. I mean, it's just unbelievable, and certain ones line up in an order, and it's amazing. I'm a big skeptic, and I always think, could this possibly just be, you know, coincidence? And I just really annoy my family because they can't believe with what you know, these different experiences that I could, you know, not just know 100%
Doubt
that it's
is
true.
I think, now I think doubt is a particularly toxic seed in us humans. And I think erasing doubt is probably gonna be one of the best things for us. Because I think we all have much a stronger intuition or something else going on, that we've just, you know, drowned it out, and we don't believe it, and we are so programmed to doubt.
Right.
We really are.
Someone made a statement that fear and faith are both beliefs that are unseen.
Yes. And a friend of mine, very wise woman, she's writing a book, and she has this expression, faith is the mode of perception. And the more I think about that, is fascinating to me. Faith is the mode of perception, which is really saying what you first have faith in is what you see and comes into your life. And I think that's a fascinating idea. And I do think actually physics is starting to meld the Eastern mysticism, the Vedic, you know, all of that is starting to come together with physics in a way that's very interesting. So that thing about faith and science is very interesting.
I think that's hard in this country because we've been so indoctrinated with Christianity and the fact that, you know, if God doesn't tell us that it's happening, then it's not happening.
Yes.
I think so a lot of the doubt becomes fear because even though like instinctively we probably feel that what is happening is true,
Yeah.
but there's the other part that you've been taught that you can't, you know, you're crazy, it's not. It's just your imagination, you know, it's not really happening.
Yeah, and so I think that instinct is really where the magic is, and that's where the truth is for us.
I assume that when you started having these experiences, it probably helped with your grief.
Yes. So many people say, oh, this must have really helped you with your grief, and that's the reason you did it, and I can't deny that, because I journaled as a way to move my grief, absolutely. Part of the reason I journal, also because these things kept happening, so I kept journaling. Grief, you know, I've seen so many clients torn apart by carrying grief for years, for decades. I mean, it's really, really, another reason I wanted to write this is, you know, people carry this stuff for a long time. And I think it's mostly false what people are carrying around. And I think really the message from our loved ones is let go. Let go and be happy in your life. The license plate song thing, there's so many times I get behind a license plate that says be happy, all the time, right? And so I think let go and be in the moment. I think there's a reason our eyes are in the front of our head and we look forward. I think there's a reason for that. We are meant to realize that we always just keep going and looking forward and let go. Yeah, so grief is very complicated, and grief can come up, and still I will have my times when I start crying and it hurts and my body hurts and can't help that. Even though I believe that something else amazing's happening. But yeah, I'm still a human and I still feel the grief.
And I was struck by what you were saying about somebody interpreting this, oh, that's just grief. There's a really obnoxious paternalism kind of diminishment I sensed in the various kind of hostilities that can be expressed towards people who have these sensitivities.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's just their ugliness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, that sounds pretty cruel. I don't just really doubt that you have an issue with, you're doubting the Christian church. It's more of a trust in your intuition, isn't that really what you're talking about?
Yeah.
But, you know, we only have, we have so much information. I don't think we're evil if we reach some conclusion based on, you know, specific information. But
Well, you know, intuition is traditionally tied with a feminine quality, and you know, intuition. A lot of the afterlife studies that I researched, there's volumes and books and books and books. A lot of it was done in the 1800s, and then it just kind of got squashed. It's there, but you know, as soon as the 1900s came in, not enough of that, and so it's just now, I think, starting to swing back in a different direction.
You think so? Wasn't there a lot going on?
There
with,
was,
like
century,
Steiner and all
Mhm.
those groups, and, you know, did something change? Because there was quite a lot going on.
Well, I'm talking more about materialism. Believing in materialism is the prime thing to believe in. Like, if it's something solid, then it's real. If it's not solid, it's not real.
Right, I think they were doing a lot with, I don't know, like, I forgot ectoplasm or something, where they would have these seances and ashes, but that was the 1900s. A lot was happening.
Yeah, maybe the early 1900s?
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably like the 30s and the 40s, and but there was also a lot of charlatans, unfortunately, and they would. But actually, there were really interesting things.
Well, there's always going to be charlatans, I think.
Right, but I mean,
Yeah.
there were really interesting things that happened in the 1900s, like the Theosophical. Somebody here must know what I'm talking about. Theosophical Society.
Oh,
There were
yeah?
all sorts.
Okay.
There's some really, and if you ever did have an interest,
Okay.
things that really affect us now, like my kids went to a Waldorf school. Rudolf Steiner was a big proponent with talking to other realms, and he was around in the 30s and 40s. So it had credibility, it was out there, but maybe you're referring to something else as switching.
Well, I mean, I think now, you know, the whole, wherever you are on watching TV now, you can always just see, there's always something on about, the word spirituality has just become, if you ask people now, are they religious or are they spiritual? Much more people will say, I'm spiritual,
Right,
I think, than say I'm religious.
right.
I think that's switching. And so what does that mean? I think it means something very different from being spiritual. It means saying, I don't know for sure, but I know there's much vaster thing going on that I am actually connected to.
Yeah.
And in particular, it's not about outside authority, but inner authority.
Right. And I don't know, I don't wanna sound, I think that's also sort of a traditionally a feminine thing, like our inner authority we listen to, maybe, Certainly many men are good at that, but it's usually linked to women, to listen to your inner authority. But I think we're moving towards, all of us need to listen to our inner authority, actually, to survive in a way. I think it's really important now, actually.
Well, as things are in this day and age, we're looking for solidity, something, what can we count on? Where do we find meaning? Where do we find some notion of stability in a increasingly chaotic world, at least in the events of the last 2 years, everything, and with this crazy administration running the show and bigger forces affecting us that we're not sure we can control. We all want to have some sense of control and agency about our lives, where we're going, and so people asking the bigger questions. Why is this all happening? Or is there any order?
Yeah, and
Is
that
it-
inner,
that we
has
can
anyone ever
control?
done virtual reality, the glasses? Have you guys tried that?
Oh, a little.
Okay, so that's really fascinating, because when you do it, to me, it's like a perfect example of how the outer external reality is starting to match our internal awareness. So when you put on those glasses, you still know it's you, but then you're in this whole world that is completely feels real. I mean, you very quickly get into it, and it's very satisfyingly real in a certain way. But you also are keenly aware of yourself in it. And so I think it's kind of fascinating, because I think that's really what's going on, is our self really always is, now we're in, now I'm in this body, but my self is gonna go on forever in
Yeah.
different ways, different scenarios. So if you ever get a chance to do virtual reality glasses, it's really interesting sensation. Yeah, much like you get when you meditate, you start to realize that awareness of self and who you are is very separate from your body, very separate. Yeah.
And just to share something that, well, I want to share, just to make it more real, to integrate it more. But there was somebody who I tremendously loved, and this person constantly was giving the message that I'm not the body, I'm not the body. You hear it over and over again, but you hear it. But the experience was over a period of years of being visited or feeling that presence, and then sort of learning that you really don't have to be in the presence of somebody physically to commune with them. But after he lost his body or left his body, I think he sort of made his rounds among some people, I would imagine, I think. But I was met then with this intense roiling ball of energy is how I saw it. Like, it wasn't like unsheathed, it wasn't a person, it was just this deep, dense, intense thing. So I found it quite frightening. But it seemed to me that it was his kind of trademark kind of thing. I mean, it was really making the point that so it was unquestionable that this is that this is me.
Yes.
Like you really get it.
Yes, thank you
So
for
anyway, for
sharing
whatever
that.
that's worth to people.
Absolutely, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for being curious and for your sharing, your questions. If anyone's experienced a loss recently, I hope that you take care of yourself. And if you want to try and connect, I think automatic writing is kind of a nice, easy way to try it. Just get quiet by yourself, take a pad of paper and a pen, and when you feel ready, ask your loved one a question, and just start writing, and don't edit what you write. And even if nothing comes to you, keep your hand moving, even if you make squiggles, and then eventually more words will come in, and just see what comes up. And I think the tricky part is to trust what comes out, because sometimes it seems kind of odd, but a lot of times communications are very metaphorical. And so I think it's a nice way to try and connect and see what happens, actually. My book. I got my book. If anyone would like to buy the book and have me sign it, we can do
How
that.
much are you selling?
It's 14.
Oh, that's great. And it's here.
It's right there, yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.